Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Eli Gimel, and Mirza Hashem today we will be learning Daf Pei Zayin Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Pei Zayin Amid Aleph, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Beis Sif Vav. Our learning today should be a Schus Refuah Shalema for Rachel Shava Basit Lefreda, Moshe Meir ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Tzvi ben Leah Miriam, Chavadasa bas Rezel Serel, Devara bas Shoshabina, and Rivka bas Shira Leah. They should have a Refuah Shalema b'Sayich Shar Kele Yisrael. Our learning should be a schus. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over all of our brothers and sisters that find themselves in harm's way, b'chol makom shehem. So, continuing here on the theme of doing various types of cleaning to various types of kelim or begadim. Says the Mechaber Sivav, Tit sha'al ragloi, if somebody has mud on his foot, oy al minolav, or more contemporary, I guess, or somebody has mud on his shoes. Says the Mechaber, mekanchoi bakoisel, he could rub them off on the wall. Avaloi bekarka, but not on the ground. You stepped into mud, you have a muddy shoe, and you want to rub the mud off of your shoe. Says the Mechaber over here, in the first opinion here, you could pick up your foot and you could rub the mud off of your shoe against a wall, but not on the ground. Now, first of all, just realize, ground over here means ground, on the earth. You can't do it on the ground. Dilma asi la'ashvuye gumois. What's the problem? The problem is that you might come up against the Isser Daraisa of ashvuye gumois, which is to fill in holes in the ground. Now, going to the ground and filling in holes in the ground could be a talada of the malacha of chayrish, the malacha of plowing. When you plow the earth, right, you make furrows, you make nice, neat furrows. But most people think of plowing just of digging up, but leveling out the ground is also considered a form of chayrish, of plowing, and therefore ashvuye gumais could be the isser of chayrish. Now, this opinion here in the Mechaber is dealing here with 2 choices of how you could clean off your shoe. One is to wipe off your shoe on the wall of a structure. The other way is to rub off the mud off your shoe on the ground. The Mechaber in the first opinion is telling you, do it on the wall, do not do it on the ground. Let's analyze both. What we're going to see in this sif, that each one of these maisim, whether you rub the mud off on the wall or you rub it off on the dirt, there are pros and cons to each one. There are reasons to aser, there are reasons to be matir. And this is really based on a Gemara in Masechta Shabbos that brings down a machlokes, Abaya and Rava. And the Mechaber is adopting over here the shita of Rava, who says, Abaya said the other way. Abaya said, rub off the mud on the ground, don't do it on the wall. Came along Rava, and Rava said, no. Do it on the wall, don't do it on the ground. And the explanation of Rava, according to the Rishonim, is like this. Rava reasons, what are you worried about if you're going to rub off the mud on the wall? What Abai is worried about is, if you have mud on your shoe, and you go to a stone wall, and you rub off the tit off of your shoe onto the wall, that kind of looks like you're plastering the wall. It looks like you're taking tit, which is a very primitive type of plaster or cement, and you're rubbing it onto the stone wall. It has the appearance of being Moisef al Habinyan. It looks like you're adding plaster or you're adding cement to the wall. So it's a mechzi keboine. It looks a little bit like building. The ground, to go rub off the mud on the ground, Abaya doesn't seem to be so worried about ashvuye gumais over there, because Abaya reasons ashvuye gumais. Well, ashvuye gumais, you're right. To fill in a hole in the ground, that could be chayrish. But first of all, you're definitely not rubbing the mud off of your shoe with the intent to fill a hole in the ground. So at most, this is a davar she'eino miskaven. It's a davar she'eino miskaven. It's not aser midaraisa. We paskin like from Siman that a davar she'eino miskaven is mutter midaraisa for sure. So Abai is like that. We should worry about a shvuye gumais. I'm more worried about merzi kabaina when you go and you smear the mud on the wall. Came along Rava, and Rava said, merzi kabaina. Let's realize something. Builders do not build using mud. Builders build using cement. Says Rava in the Gemara over there, this is what we would call a binyan chikla. This is a very primitive, very weak type of building that only poverty-stricken villagers would do, and therefore, at most, even if you did this intentionally on Shabbos, even if you took tit and you intentionally rubbed it onto the stone wall, it would only be an issa d'Rabbanan. It wouldn't be an issa d'Oraisa, because it's a binyan chakla. It's a very weak type of building. And therefore, at most, even if you did it intentionally, it would only be an issa d'Rabbanan. Now, you're doing it as a davar she'eino miskaven. I'm not going to worry about rubbing off the mud off your shoe on a wall. I don't see a problem. But to rub it off on the ground, says Rava, over there, you're risking a very serious problem. Why? Because the way Taisus and Naran, the way they learn the Gemara is like this. When somebody has mud on his shoe, and he wants to rub it off, okay? Like, pun intended, put yourself in this person's shoes. When you have something on your shoe and you want to rub it off, what do you look for? You look for an edge, like the edge of a step, which we're actually going to discuss soon. You look for something that has an edge, so you could rub the stuff off of your shoe. Says Rava, when somebody wants to rub something off his shoe and he wants to use the ground, you know what he's going to do? He's bedafka going to look for a hole in the ground. Because by finding a hole in the ground, now he could rub the tit off his shoe against the edge of the hole. Oh, says Rava, if somebody has mud on his shoe, and you're going to tell him that he should rub it off on the ground because you don't want him to rub it off on the kaisel because it's smerzi kabaina, what he's going to do is he's going to look for a hole in the ground. He's going to rub off the mud into the hole in the ground. And while he's doing that, he might also forget himself and he might say, oh, I'll kill two birds with one stone. Not only will I scrape the mud off of my shoe, I'll also fill up the hole. Now he could mamish come to a daraisa. And it's very critical that we get this understanding of Rava, because we're going to bounce back and forth between different opinions over here. In Sivav, we're going to see the Mishnah Berurah is going to go through this. So again, the Mechaber is adapting the Shita of Rava, and he's saying, at least in this first opinion, and he's saying, you have mud on your shoe. To rub it off on the wall, that could be merzi keboine. It could look a little bit like you're smearing plaster on the wall. Says Rava, that's okay. And the Mechaber says, that's mutter. Because again, at worst, it would be binyan chikla. Even if you did it intentionally, it would be binyan baina shaloi kedarkai. It would be an issa d'Rabbanan. Now you're doing it as a davar she'eino miskaven. We're not going to worry about that. That's fine, says the Mechaber. But to rub it off on the ground, you're going to look for a hole in the ground. You're going to go scrape your shoe against the edge of the hole in the ground. Then you might come mamish to the Isser of Ashvuye Gumais because you might forget yourself and you might fill the hole intentionally. That, the Mechaber says, like Rava, that you cannot do. So again, titcha al ragloi, if you have mud on your foot, or on your shoes, mechanical bekaisel, rather go ahead and rub it off on the wall. That's mutter. Avaloi bekarka, but not on the ground. Dilma osile ashvuye gumais. You might come to the problem of ashvuye gumais. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut and chafav ay almin olav. Now, right away, the Mechaber comes up against a problem over here, because we're going to see later on, I think in the next share, not in today's share, where we're going to have a Mechaber in Sif Ches that says you're not allowed to scrape mud off of your boot, off of your shoe. So, excuse me, we have over here in Sivav that you could go ahead and you could rub off the mud off of your shoe on the ground. But in Sivches, the Mechaber says you're not allowed to scrape off your shoe. So the Mishnah Berurah explains the difference. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is not similar to what we're going to learn in Sivches. Ein megarden minol bein chadash bein yashan, that you're not allowed to scrape off a shoe, whether it's a new shoe or an old shoe. V'hainu afilu yesh tit al gabav, even from the mud that is on its surface. The kavanasei lahaser atit, when your intent is to remove the mud. This is like we explain over there. In Sivches, we're not talking about rubbing your shoe against the ground. In Sivches, we're talking about taking a knife, whether you use the sharp edge of the knife or the back dull edge of the knife. We're talking about taking a knife and scraping off your shoe. That you're not allowed to do. Why? Over there's a different problem. Over there, the problem that we're dealing with is when you take a knife, even the dull side of a knife, and you scrape off your shoe, you may be smoothing out the leather. And that would be an isser of memachik. But when you take your shoe and you rub it against a wall or against a wooden beam, we don't see that you're going to come to memachik, that you're going to smooth out the leather. Okay, so again, let's just get this clear. Over here in Sifav, the Mechaber is telling you, you're allowed to go ahead, you have mud on your shoe, you can go ahead and rub your shoe against the wall to rub off the mud. In Sivches, the Mechaber says, you're not allowed to take a knife, even if you use the back edge of the knife, and scrape off your shoe. Explains to Mishnah Berurah what's the difference. Over there, we're dealing with an isser of memachik. We're afraid that when you take a keli, you take a knife, and you scrape your shoe, you might come to smooth out the leather. Over here, we're not afraid that you're going to come to smooth out the leather. The Kosav Taz, says the Mishnah Berurah, the Taz writes, based on this halacha, back in the day, when people walked on mud all the time, at the entrance to the shul, they had a boot scraper. The boot scraper was an iron strip that you would go and rub your boot off. They didn't have a doormat. Doormats are fine for when you're walking on nice paved surfaces. You have a doormat just to wipe the dust off your shoe. Back in the day, they were walking on mud. So they had a boot scraper that you would come and you would scrape your boot on. And the edge was sharp. Says the Mishnah Berurah in the name of the Taz, this was a boot scraper to scrape off your boot before you walked into shul. Says the Taz, also lasis ken b'Shabbos. You would not be allowed to use that boot scraper on Shabbos. Because that would be similar to scraping off your shoe with the back edge of a knife. That would be the problem of memachik. The Magen Avram took the Chumrah even further than the Taz, and he said, "Afilo haya habarzel of v'rachav b'roishai v'haloi haya loichoid." The Taz asers the boot scraper if the boot scraper is somewhat sharp, at least like the back edge of a knife. The Magen Avram says even if it's a pipe, it's nice and wide and broad, so it doesn't have an edge, you're still not allowed to do it. He says still, it's not less than the back edge of a knife. So says the Magen Avram. So the Magen Avram sticks with what the Mechaber says over here in Sivav. You need to scrape off your boot, your shoe. You do it against a wall or against a wooden beam, or on the edge of the steps. Now, I think that when the Magen Avram is talking about the edge of steps, he's probably talking about, wooden step treads. We know what the wooden step treads tend to look like in the shul, right? They're very high traffic. So they get rounded off, they're smoothed out. It doesn't have an edge. But it says to Mishnah Berurah, if you wipe it off gently, the Mishnah Berurah says you don't have to be so machmer if you wipe it off gently. Because again, let's remember, what are we dealing with here? The whole isser that the Taz and the Magen Avram are dealing with is not an isser of cleaning the boot. It's an isser of memachei ka'or. It's an isser that when you use a boot scraper, that's sifches, we're afraid you might come to be smoothing out the leather. Says the Mishnah Berurah, when you wipe off your shoe, you wipe off your boot gently. We don't have to be concerned. Ubefratim atit lach. Certainly, if you're dealing with wiping off moist mud, it doesn't take a lot to get it off. Bevadai eid lahachmer. We don't have to be machmer that you're going to come to a problem of memachek ha'or. Okay, so just very quickly, so far over here in Sivav, we see the first opinion of the Mechaber. You've got a muddy shoe. You want to wipe off your muddy shoe. Said the Mechaber, do not do it on the ground. Because if you do it on the ground, there's a fear that you might come to Ashvuye Gumois, which is a told of Chayrish. And again, the way the Rishonim explain the fear is that you're going to look for a hole in the ground so that you have an edge to wipe off your shoe from. And then you're going to be filling up the hole with the mud that comes off your shoe. And you might forget yourself, and you might actually do this with intent. You'll say, great, I'll clean off my shoe, and at the same time I'll level out the ground. Now you're already coming dangerously close to an Issa Daraisa of being a Shvui Gumais, a Tolda of Chayrish. Better go ahead and wipe your boot off, wipe your shoe off against the wall. That's the first opinion here. Now continues the Mechaber and he says, V'yesh mi she'oiser af b'koisel. However, there are those, and he brings this down from the Rif, V'yesh mi she'oiser af b'koisel. There are those that say that no, you're not allowed to wipe off your shoe on the ground, like Shitas Rava, but you're also not allowed to wipe off your shoe on the wall, like Shitas Abaya. Abaya said you're not allowed to do it on the wall. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's wrong with doing it against the wall? Shall af b'koisel shall avonim. So first of all, you have to understand that we're talking about a stone wall or a brick wall. Mishum demerzi kemoisef ala binyan umechazkei. Because when you take your shoe and you rub the mud off onto a stone or a brick wall, that's where they use stone and mortar. Cement. Now it looks like you're adding cement. Mud is a very primitive form of cement. So it looks like you're adding on to the wall. It's a mechzi keboine. So this sheet of the Rif is being machmir like both Rava and Abaya. Uladidei, says the Mishnah Berurah, according to this Rif, ein mekanchen elo b'koira oyal gabi even. According to the Rif, the only thing that would be mutter would be to rub over your shoe on a wooden beam, or, because over there's no mechzi kibaina, you're not adding cement to a wooden beam, or onto a stone. There's a random stone outside. Rub off your boot onto the stone. Or if there's a wooden structure, you could wipe it off onto the wall of a wooden structure. So that was opinion number 2. So opinion number 1, Rava. Opinion number 2, the Chumrah of Rava and the Chumrah of Abaya. Now we go to the Ramah, top line here, Peizayin and Beis, where we have a third shita. Haga, v'yeshem atir b'shneim. And then there's a shita that takes the kula of Abaya and says you could rub off your boot on the ground, and the kula of Rava, who says that you could rub off your boot on the wall. This shita adapts both kulas. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and he reasons like this. The lamoisef ala binyan loy chashinan mishum de binyan chaklohu binyan garua shabalay akvarim. This shita that's Mekel is taking Rava's opinion on rubbing the boot off on the wall. He says, rubbing a boot off on the wall, what are you afraid of? Mechzi keboine. Even if you did it intentionally, it would be binyan shaloi kedarkoi. It would be only an issa d'Rabbanan. Now you're doing it as a davar she'eino miskaven to clear off your boot. We're going to worry about that? We're not going to worry about that. How about Rava's concern that don't do it on the ground because of Ashvuye Gumais? Or l'shem yikanech b'mokay maguma v'yashvena gam ken loy chashinan. This shita over here, the matir, the Mekel, says what? Rava. We're going to worry that the guy who wants to clean off his boot is bedafka going to look for a hole in the ground, so he should have an edge, and then he's going to forget himself, and he's going to come to be mashva gumais, and he's going to come to a daraisa, because it's not even going to be a davar she'eino miskaven. This shita says we don't have to worry so much. Somebody wants to rub off his boot, wherever he finds a spot to rub off his boot, and he certainly doesn't have in mind ashvuye gumais, and at most it's a davar she'eino miskaven. We're not going to be worried. Nevertheless, I feel lididhu. Even according to this sheet of the Rif, but the Rif would agree that if you do want to rub off your boot on the ground, don't do it with as a hole. or linyan halacha, when it comes to halacha l'maisa, hataz kosav, the Taz writes, to be midi the rabbanon yesh lismach ala makilin. Since we're dealing over here strictly with the rabbanons, we could rely on the opinion of the mekel, the mutter b'shneim, that it's taka mutter to rub off your boot, both on the ground, both on the wall. V'yesh ben achronim shesayvrin, but there are those achronim who are of the opinion denachad lahachmer lesser b'shneim, to take on the most stringent opinion that they're both aser. V'nira de b'kaisel vada yesh lismach lahater kedasa b'chaber. The Chavetz Chaim says definitely you can be makel to rub off on a wall. Shekain das roiv harishonim. That would be the opinion of most rishonim. It would seem over here that to do it on chidudei ha-madregos, to rub off your shoe on the edge of a step, there seems to be absolutely no reason not to. Again, there's no chshashas over here. No one's going to think that you're being moisef al binyan. You're giving work to the janitor. You're not being moisef al binyan. You're not being mashve gumois. You're not doing anything. There would seem to be no problem at all. Continues the Ramah, top line. Or you could take up a pottery shard, a little shard of earthenware, and you could use that to scrape off the boot. Says, but it has to be, says the Ramah, cheres haroy letaltel. It has to be a shard that is not muktzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, everybody would agree that that's mutter. And apparently, when it comes to a pottery shard, we're not going to worry of memachik by a pottery shard. Ice cut limud. The Ramah was careful to say that it has to be a pottery shard, haroy letaltel, that's not muktzah. We'll have to wait till we get to Siman Shin Ches and we learn the halachas of muktzah to determine what kind of pottery shard is not muktzah. Okay, now we go to a sif that becomes very, very complex based on the halachas that we've learned before in Sif Aleph and Sif Hey. Sif Zayin seems to jump back into an issue that we've already discussed several times, and that is cleaning a garment using a particular method. Okay, let's see what the Mechaber says here. Tit sha'al bigdoi. You get some mud on your beged. Okay, tit sha'al bigdoi, says the Mechaber, mishafshifai mi bifnim. You're allowed to rub it off from the inside. Now, let's dive right away into the Mishnah Berurah so that you understand what the Mechaber is saying. First of all, let's cut Lamed Aleph, Sha'al Bigda. You have mud on your clothing, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ve'ein chilik b'chal zeh bein meshi lepishton v'tzemer. The fabric doesn't matter here. This halacha applies equally whether we're dealing with silk, whether we're dealing with linen, whether we're dealing with wool. If you want to know why the Mishnah Berurah felt he had to say this, you have to take a look here at the Biur Halacha, Dibur Hamaschel Tit Sha'al Bigdoi. Be that as it may, let's go to Lamed Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mishav Shafai Mi Bifnim. So, you got mud on your clothing. Says the Mechaber, you could rub it out from the inside. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, what does that mean? Hainu, this means, Sha'oichiz HaBeged Bifnim. You hold the beged from the inside. So here's my Bekesh over here. This is the outside of the beged. You got mud on the outside of the beged. Says the Mechaber, explains the Mishnah Berurah, this is what the Mechaber means. You could hold the beged from the inside. I have my hands on the inside of the Bekesh now, right? So, She'oiches a beged bifnim, you will hold the beged on the inside, neged mokoim hatit, opposite where the mud is. So the mud is over here on the bekesha. I'm going to hold the bekesha from the inside. And now what do? And you bend the beged, and you rub the two sides together until the mud falls off. So again, the mud is located on the outside of the beged. I put my hands inside the beged, opposite where the mud is. I fold the beged, and I rub the two sides together until the mud falls off. That's what the Mechaber is saying over here you're allowed to do. Now we're going to break here for a second in the Mishnah Berurah. Let's not go weiter in the Mishnah Berurah yet. Let's go back to the Mechaber now that we understand the metzius of the Mechaber. So again, says the Mechaber, Titcha al bigdai, when you have mud on your beged, mishav shefay mi befnim, you could rub it from the inside. Why is that okay? Because it's not clear. It's not obvious. Muchacha milsa means it's not clear. It's not readily apparent that what you're doing is malaben. Avaloi bachutz, but you cannot take the beged from the outside and rub the tit off from the outside, didumi limalaben, because that already is similar to malaben. What does it mean it's similar to malaben? It's mechzi kimalaben. If I take it on the outside where the stain is, where the mud is, and I'm rubbing it from the outside, now it is readily apparent that what I'm trying to do is a form of libun, and therefore it's an issa derabanan. Now, it's not an issa deraisa. We have to be very clear over here. It's obvious that what the Mechaber is saying over here is that this is an issa derabanan. Didami limalaben. It's similar to malaben. It's not malaben, but it's similar to malaben. Okay, so again, to be clear, the Mechaber told us in this halacha what you are allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, and if you do what you're not allowed to do, it's an issa derabanan. You got mud on your beged, to go inside and rub it out from the inside, mutter. Not even also midrabanan, completely mutter. Why is it mutter? Because it's not clear that it's malabi. Do it from the outside, that's an issa derabanan. Why is it an issa derabanan? Didami limalaben, because this is mechzi kimalaben. This looks like doing libun. Okay, now we have the halacha that the Mechaber said straight. Now we could start dealing with the ramifications of this. Let's continue the Mishnah Berurah's cut and limud beis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, seemingly there's a stira over here between what we're learning in Sif Zayin and something that the Mechaber said earlier. V'afta le'el b'sif hey, asar b'sudar l'shav shifai. In Sif hey we learned somebody has a sudar, somebody has like a scarf, and he wants to rub it. So in Sif hey, the Mechaber told us, you have a sudar, you're not allowed to take it and rub it with your hands. The context over there was, the Mechaber drew a distinction between a chaluk, which we said is like an undershirt, and a sudar. We said that somebody has a chaluk, he washed it, it's stiff. The Mechaber said, you're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to rub it with your hands in order to soften it. Why? Because over there it's clear that what you're doing is to soften it. Any brightness, any improvement in appearance that the undershirt is going to get is purely incidental. And therefore, the Mechaber said it's 100% mutter. Your kavana over there is completely only to soften it. Aval sudar aser. But the Mechaber said to rub a sudar, that is aser. Why? That's an issa derabanan. Because a sudar is something that you wear on the outside. And when you rub it, you're going to have the effect of improving the appearance of it. And therefore, that's an issa derabanan. So again, Sif hey, you're not allowed to take the sudar and rub the sudar because you're going to improve its appearance. And it's clear that you're doing it l'tzachtzachai. And therefore, it's an issa derabanan because it's like malaben. That was Sif hey. Now, here in Sif Zayin, the Mechaber says that when it comes to mud that's on your beged, you're allowed to rub it from the inside. Now, asks the Chavetz Chaim, I don't understand. After le'el b'sif hey asar b'sodar l'shav shefay v'loy mechalkinan bein mibifnim li mibachutz. I don't understand. By the sudar, you're telling me I'm not allowed to rub it, and over there the Mechaber doesn't say you're not allowed to rub it from the outside, but you are allowed to rub it from the inside. Over here, suddenly when you have mud on your bekisha, the Mechaber says you're not allowed to rub it from the outside, but you're allowed to rub it on the inside. What's the difference between Sif hey and Sif Zayin? Why don't we say that by the sudar, you're allowed to rub it from the inside? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hasam hu mechaven l'tzachtzachai. By the sudar, when you rub it, I don't care even if you're rubbing it from the inside, when you're going to rub it, your kavana is that you want to make it look better. You want to shine it up, and you want to improve its appearance. But over here, all you're doing is removing the mud. And he brings this down from the Gra. Now, the way the Mefarshim talk about this, what seems to come out is like this. The distinction that they want to make between Sif Hey and Sif Zayin. So first of all, you have to understand that both in Sif Hey and Sif Zayin, we're talking about Isurei D'Rabbanan. Now, when we break down each case, in Sif Hey, what you're doing is, you have a sudar. You have this scarf, this shawl. You want to rub it in order to improve its appearance. Now let's break down, let's go through the Gedarim of Malabin, of the Isser of laundering on Shabbos. So first of all, we've discussed this already several times. For sure, according to the Mechaber, when you do something to cleanse or improve the appearance of a garment and you don't use any liquid, right away it cannot be Malabin Daraisa. Right away the Mechaber holds that is not intrinsically an act of Malabin. And that's why we saw that in Sif Aleph, the Mechaber said, if you take a garment that's wet from dew and you shake it out, that could potentially be an Issa Daraisa. But the Mechaber held that if you have a dusty garment and you shake it out, it can't be an Issa Daraisa. The Ramah disagreed. But according to the Mechaber for sure, and we're dealing right now over here with the Mechaber, when you do something to improve the appearance of a beged, but you don't have any liquid, right away it can't be malabin. So if we take a look at Sif Hey, where we're dealing with the sudar, you're dealing with a scarf, you're doing a maisa, you're going ahead and you're rubbing it in order to improve its appearance. There's no liquid, so malabin daraisa it's certainly not going to be. Now what's your kavana? Your kavana is you want to make the garment look better. You want to improve the appearance of the beged. Somehow by rubbing it, you brighten it up. Now again, we don't understand exactly what the mitzias of that is. But somehow, whatever kind of fabrics they were dealing with, rubbing it had an effect to brighten up. That's what tzitzuach means. It had an effect of brightening up and improving the appearance of the beged. Over there, the Mechaber says that's an Issa D'Rabbanan, whether you do it from the inside or from the outside. Over here in Sif Zayin, when we're talking about removing mud from the beged, the Mechaber says this is a notch down. Over here, it's a mutter to do it from the inside. It's an Issa D'Rabbanan to do it from the outside. So let's take the Issa D'Rabbanan first. It seems that what the Mechaber is saying is to rub the garment from the outside to remove the mud, that already rises to the level of, let's say, Sif Hey by the scarf. Just like by Sif Hey by the scarf, you're doing a form of cleansing, you're not using any liquid, and we're going to say it's an Issa D'Rabbanan because it's a Mechzi Malaben. It looks like Malaben because you're doing something obviously to improve the appearance of the beged. So too, when you have mud on your beged and you rub it from the outside, you're not using a liquid, but we're going to say it's an Issa D'Rabbanan. It's very much Mechzi Malaben. Since you're doing a maisa, you're rubbing on the outside right where the mud is. But to go to the inside of the garment and rub it from the inside of the garment, that's not even going to be an Issa D'Rabbanan. Why? Well, first of all, again, Darais it can't be. There's no liquid. Also, it's not obviously Mechzi Malaben because your hands are not working on the beged where the mud is. Your hands are on the inside. They're not on the outside. Also, and this is what the Mishnah Berurah is alluding to over here when he quotes the Gra, over here, Ein kavanasai ela lahaser hatit. Over here, what you're doing is, in Sif Hey by the Sudar, you're taking the Sudar and you're doing something to improve the appearance of the fabric. The fabric is going to get more of a shine. It's going to look nicer. You're going to brighten up the fabric. What are you doing over here? Over here, you're just removing mud from the surface of the fabric. You're not improving the fabric. Not only that, there's still going to be a stain left. Whatever stain is left over from the mud, you're not cleaning it out. You're not laundering it out. You're just rubbing the mud off of the surface of the fabric. So what I would say is, in a nutshell, I'll tell you what the difference is. The difference is that in Sif Hay, you're doing something that has a much greater effect. What you're doing is, again, you're shining up and you're improving the appearance of the fabric. Over there, that becomes an Issa D'Rabbanan. That's Mersi Kemalabin. Over here in Sif Zayin, you're not doing that. You're not being as effective. All you're doing is you're removing the mud. Now, if you do that from the outside surface, that's Mersi Kemalabin, because you're mamish working on where the mud is to rub the mud off of the fabric. That's very much Mersi Kemalabin. That's going to be an Issa D'Rabbanan. But to put your hands inside, when you combine the fact that you're working from the inside together with the fact that what you're doing is not going to be so effective because there's still going to be a residual stain, that, the Mechaber says, is mamish mutter. So, we've answered now. We understand why Sif Zayin is mutter if you work from the inside. We understand why Sif Hay is an Issa D'Rabbanan by the Sudder. It's mamish an Issa D'Rabbanan because it's Mersi Kemalabin. It's very effective. You're brightening up the Sudder. Now let's go to Sif Aleph. Sif Aleph, where you have a garment, a black, newish garment that's wet from dew, and you go ahead and you shake it out, that, the Mechaber said, could be a daraisa. Why could that be a daraisa? Because over there you even have liquid. You have liquid, you have the dew, and it's very effective, because you're talking about a black, newish garment where you're going to have a very powerful effect by shaking out the dew. The change that you're making is going to be very noticeable, and your makbid, you're doing it in order to cleanse the garment, that becomes elevated to a daraisa. Now, I'm really only scratching the surface over here. There's a lot more that could be said on this, but we do what we do, and we can't do more. Okay, fine. Let's go weiter over here. Oiskad Lamed Gimel. To rub it from the outside is usher. The Mechaber said, the dami l'malabein, it's Mersi Kemalabin, it looks like laundering. Says the Mishnah Berurah, shemisyapa habeged al yedei, you're improving the appearance of the beged by taking off the mud. Umalabin, mamish heavy, but it can't be libun daraisa. Day nois and olav mayim, because you're not using liquid. So you see, here's what the Mishnah Berurah is explaining. Even when you rub it from the outside, it cannot rise to the level of a daraisa, according to the Mechaber, because you're not using any liquid. A D'Rabbanan it will be because you're working directly on the dirty area and you're clearly doing it in order to make the beged look better. So Mersi Kemalabin it will be. Okay, let's go weiter. Next halacha here, 3 lines down, says the Mechaber. Umegararoi batziporin. You could take your nail, very complicated halacha here. You could take your nail and you could scratch the mud off. But, says the Mechaber, v'yesh befarshim dahani mililach. There are those that say that all this is only true if the mud is wet. Aval yavesh, but if the mud is dry, usher, you certainly wouldn't be allowed to scratch it off, davi toichen, because now we're moving away from malabing completely. To scratch off dried mud is a problem of toichen, grinding. You're taking mud, dried mud that's in a cake, it's caked on, and you're breaking it up into little crumbs. So it's like you're grinding. That would already be an Issa D'Rabbanan. It would be looking like toichen. Says the Mishnah Berurah, I think it's an Issa D'Rabbanan, not a D'Oraisa. Let's take a look. Yeah, it's definitely an Issa D'Rabbanan, because it's certainly a Davar Shein Miskaven. You don't want to grind it. That's not what you're trying to do. Or it's at least a Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufa, right? Okay, let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, Oiskat Lamedalu, Umegararoi batziporin mibachutz. You could scratch off the mud from the outside with your nail. Dezeloi nechshav libun, that's not considered malabin. Or you could scrape it off with the back of a knife. Maybe even with the blade of a knife. But there are those that say you can only do this if it's moist, not if it's dry. If it's dry, there are those that say you can't scratch it off. scrape it off. You also can't rub it off. Afilu bifnim. In other words, when the Mechaber says over here, Yesh befarshim, Dani mili lach, he's going back on the whole sif. This that the Mechaber said in the beginning of the sif, that if you work from the inside, you could rub the mud off. It's only if it's wet. If it's dry, you can't, because again, you're going to have the teichen issue. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut lamed vav David teichen. Avagav dev malacha shein tzricha legufa. Even though this is a classic case of a malacha shein tzricha legufa, the malacha of teichen is when you take grain and you grind it into flour. That's a malacha that you need for the exact purpose of malacha. You want flour. You don't want wheat. So you're grinding to produce flour. When you have mud caked onto your jacket and you scrape it off, you're not doing this in order to produce ground up mud. You don't want ground up mud. You just don't want the mud on your jacket. So it's definitely a malacha shein tzricha legufa. Al kapanim isura miya ikalu kol yalma, but it still would be an issur of teichen. Val yedei any Yehudi mutter, to ask on any Yehudi to do this would be mutter. Klasav Taz, the Taz writes, Nearly dafka b'yesh mamashas tit ala beged. This issur could only apply if there is substantial, this substance of mud caked onto the beged. Ukishu megarasham, and therefore when you scratch it, oz neiflim pirurei atit, so you're breaking off crumbs of the dried mud and it's crumbling off. Zeh doimel teichen. That could be considered a problem of teichen. But if there's a mud stain, not a cake of mud caked onto the beged, it's only a mud stain, and you're scraping over there to take the stain off, but you're not producing crumbs of mud, that can't be teichen. Therefore, if somebody has a garment that has a little bit of a stain, and you don't have dirt that's caked on over there, you could scrape with your fingernail to take out the stain, kadeshi yispal b'nikius, so that you should be able to daven b'nikius. He's talking about tsoya, if there's some kind of excrement on your baguette. Ad kan lashon ataz. V'lanias daiti yesh la'ayin bazeh tuva. The Mishnah Berurah says you got to take a step back and take a look into this halacha lamaisa. Tenehi mishum teichen leka. It's very nice that you might not have teichen over here because you don't have a cake that you're turning into crumbs. Hari al kolpanim mechavim bazel yapis habeged ol taksachai shelo yishar alav shum roishim liklach. But l'chara, what you're doing is malabein, you're taking out a stain. Vayin bebir halacha she'araknu mazeh. You should know furthermore the pashat afilo das ataz in mutter rak lagar b'tziparin l'kaskes mivifnim aval kaskes b'machutz also b'chol gavni. Certainly to scratch it off would be aser. Halacha lamaisa. If you have a stain that's wet, if you have something like mud or something else on a beged and it's wet, halacha lamaisa, it would seem the place can say that you're allowed to scrape it off as long as it's going to leave behind a stain. In other words, you got a little mud on your bekasha, on your jacket, and you want to go and you want to wipe it off. There's no teichen issue because, again, it's moist. It's not going to crumble off. You're not grinding anything into crumbs. So a teichen problem there isn't. A libun, a malabein problem, there also isn't because it's going to leave behind a stain. Or you could do it from the inside. More than that, halacha lamaisa, I'm afraid to go into right now. I think I'm going to leave this within the realm of I'm giving you the back of the story, so to speak. Understand what's at play over here, so you could ask the shaila. If I have time, maybe I'll try to produce a short segment where we could go into a few different halacha lamaisa cases. I'm very hesitant. People ask me sometimes that I should do a little bit more of this kind of halacha lamaisa. The reason I'm hesitant to do it is because the olam should understand that there's a tremendous amount of preparation. I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back or anything. That's not my point. There's a tremendous amount of preparation for me to do what I try to do, which is to give you background, to go to the Gemara, to the Rishonim, and allow you to understand what goes into the background of all of these halachas. To now take it to another step and say halacha lamaisa, to give out psukim halacha lamaisa, so that I'm taking the achrayus on my back to be your posek on particular cases, that's a whole other level of preparation, which if I have the time to do it, I wouldn't mind sitting down and preparing a segment, shiloh by shiloh, giving you a few different shilohs and giving you the halacha lamaisa, but I'm not going to do that sitting here like this after being busy having gone through Gemara, Rashi, Taisus, Ran, and Rif, and Rambam, and Bir Halacha, and to do what I do here, to now go ahead and just shoot off halacha lamaisa that I'm not prepared to do. So we do what we do. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should send Yeshua for us, but us should do him to those in need. We should be zeicher to see the BS called Tzedek. B'meher v'yameinu amen. Be well.